Recording is in progress. Just as everyone comes in, feel free to pop your cameras on so we can see who is behind the names, if you feel like it. All right, it's 6:33. Maybe we'll just give it another minute or so and then we'll get cracking because we have got quite a busy lineup and plan to chat this evening. All right. I'll start with a bit of housekeeping. Well, actually, I'll start tonight's session by acknowledging that I am joining from the lands of the Dja Dja Wurrung, and I pay my respects to elders past and present. I'd encourage everyone in the chat to pop down on what country that you're joining us from, and the more and more we do this, the more and more we find out, for ourselves what country we're on, and more we get to learn by common name where other people are joining us from. So one day it won't be a big question mark when we see these names. We'll be putting the pieces together. And I will pass now to the guests that we have tonight joining us. And they're going to do a little introduction of themselves and their farm. And we will start with the AFSA committee member, Randall. Randall, feel free to take the mic.
Hello, thank you, Amy. Hello, everybody. Welcome along. This is going to be an exciting chat tonight. So I'm coming to you from Bundjalung country in the Goombra Valley, which is just west of the Great Dividing Range, right on the northern edge of Bundjalung country. Amy, do you want me to give everyone a bit of a breakdown on what we do and our bit of country and all that sort of stuff?
Maybe just go name and farm, and then we'll whip through, and then because we're going to go back to Tam to do a broad context setting. So maybe that's enough for now, Randall, and we'll go to Perfect. Robin next. Thank you.
Robin from Transition Farm. Our farm is located on the Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nation land.
Wonderful, thank you. And over to Nick.
G'day everyone, I'm Nick. My partner Bridie and I are Belvedere Farm. We farm across about 150 acres of unceded Jinnabara country in the hills between Maloney and Woodford in southeast Queensland.
Thank you very much. And lastly, over to Louise and David.
We're Highfield Farm in Woodland. We're on Wiradjuri country in the south slopes of New South Wales, near Adelong. And yeah, we have a farm and a conservation area that we manage together. Hi, Jared.
Some familiar faces. Wonderful, thank you so much. And yes, I'll just hand over to President Tam, who's going to introduce this solidarity session that we've termed Biodiversity Beyond the Shelterbelt. Over to you, Tam.
Thanks, Amy. And I'd like to acknowledge I'm joining from the unceded lands of the Dja Dja Wurrung here in the Central Highlands, and pay my respects to elders past and present, also to any Indigenous Australians who might be here tonight with us. I'd like to start, actually, I'm going to try and set the scene for why we're having this conversation before these excellent people tell you about their work on the ground. And it starts, with the relentless pursuit of economic growth that's hardwired into a capitalist economy, right, which is leading to the financialization of nature. We know that capitalism's mode is to colonize, exploit, and abandon. And it's been doing that incredibly well and successfully. So much so that we have, 9 species of, actually I should look at this properly. We're in the middle of the 6th mass extinction in 4.6 billion years. And in the global north, 90% of cattle belong to just 6 breeds. 20% of livestock breeds are at risk of extinction. And of 6,000 plant species that are being cultivated for food, just 9 account for 66% of total crop production. That's a pretty serious state of affairs. consider the difference in the traditional stewardship of Indigenous peoples and peasants globally, where maintenance of a sustainable resource base is really central organizing principle, and the sets of practices of communities connected to place rather than money or status. So I want to quote from Tyson Yunkaporta, Appalachian man, who says, an Indigenous person is a member of a community retaining memories of life lived sustainably on a land base as part of that land base. Indigenous knowledge is any application of those memories as living knowledge to improve present and future circumstances. I contrast that with how agriculture from the West has been treating the land for a very long time. So in response to the increasing crisis of biodiversity loss, with multiple levels of government have been trying to address what we should do about it. And right now we have the Global Biodiversity Framework being developed by the Convention on Biological Diversity. That sounds very far away to people here on the ground, and it is, but these UN frameworks, which is like the climate agreements, this is like the equivalent to the Paris Agreement on nature instead of on climate. This framework will then be how countries like Australia, well, all countries, except for America, who's the only UN member who's not a member of the CBD, interestingly. Everyone else will develop their national action plans for how to deal with biodiversity loss. And there are two major themes running in these that civil society is critiquing. One of those is the 30-30 target, which is the proposal to lock up 30% of the world by 2030 to separate us further from nature, basically. It comes from that anthropocentric view that says that humans are separate from nature. And we're not going to solve the problem of humans' impact on nature and our participation with ecosystems by further separating us from those ecosystems. We need to separate harmful practices, of course, but not humans in our entirety. The second part of that problem, the second part of the proposals are around nature-based solutions. This is mostly to do with carbon, similar to carbon offsets, but biodiversity offsets. And that is just one of the most preposterous things I've ever heard of in my life. It's like, oh, sorry, we lost the koalas, but we saved the kangaroos. You cannot offset biodiversity. When you lose a species or a breed or an ecosystem, you can't just replace it with another one. And so just to quickly relate that to what's happening at the local level, you see across Australia, land being locked up for conservation. So farming zone being turned into rural conservation. This is happening here in Macedon near us, actually also in my own shire. It's happening everywhere in Australia. And again, it comes from that idea that humans are inherently bad for nature. Humans are separate from nature. And so we have to protect nature from humans. And what we actually need is all over the world and here are agroecological farmers like the ones who are going to be telling you about their practices tonight to actually manage and custodian the land in their care, not separate us from it in its entirety. So I'm going to hand it over now for some of these people to tell you the ways that they're doing that. And I'm really excited to hear their stories. Thanks everyone for coming, and I'll be listening.
Thanks for that, Tam. Thank you very much. And yes, we'll pop back to Randall. Randall, feel free to introduce your farm, and I guess to kick off the discussion, it'd be great to hear from you how you promote and how you see biodiversity through the breeds at your farm.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, so I'm part, along with my family, Janita, Eli and Brody, we run a farm called Echo Valley Farm, where, yeah, as I said earlier, on Bunjalung country, 350 acres of varying topography and varying amounts of disrepair. About half of our property, 150 acres of it, has been under the plough and in traditional conventional agriculture for 120 plus years that we know of. So heavily impacted through conventional agriculture. And so what we're in the journey of restoring that landscape. We've also about another 150 acres of it is remnant vegetation that would have been deemed as marginal country, but we see it as a really important part of our ecosystem. So we run a multi-species farm. So we call ourselves a stacked integrated farm using holistic management techniques. So we have pastured poultry, pasture pigs and cattle that we manage holistically. So they're always moving around the landscape, helping to regenerate the soil that we inherited, along with quite a hefty ecological debt, as we like to call it. So heavily depleted landscape. So we're using those animals in a restorative process to try to build diversity, both through as many different plant species as possible and all that sort of stuff. But tonight I was going to quickly chat about breed diversity in terms of animals, and just share some experiences that we've had as we've gone on that journey, and as we've sort of bumped up against the reality of industrial agriculture, and as we've tried to build a system that celebrates the natural instincts of the livestock that we're using on our landscape. So I guess one that's really obvious, poultry has been so heavily industrialized, probably more than any other animal in the agricultural system. And you can see, actually, Michael Summerlad, some people may know of him, developed the Summerlad birds. He wrote a really interesting article, I think it's called Frankenchicken, and it talks about how over millennia of developing an industrialized bird for the poultry industry, both as egg layers and as meat producers, they've just created basically a reproductive tract with an outer skin that remotely resembles a bird, but actually is devoid of their natural instincts and all the benefits that they would provide to our ecosystem. And we've really come up, we use pastured poultry, egg producing birds for our one of our major incomes for our farming enterprise. And what we're trying to do is utilize these birds with their natural instincts to help regenerate our landscape. But what we very quickly discovered when we were utilizing the highline breed, or even the Isa brown, a lot of people, you know, that classic brown bird that you see in the industrial egg production system, is that they have been bred over time, and they really have limited natural instincts left. And so what we were trying to find is a bird that had a bit of self-preservation, that understood what it meant when a shadow came over top, that would be an eagle or a bird of prey, and that they would then seek out protection and shelter. And we're also looking for an animal that knew what scratching and pecking and doing all those sorts of things. And so we actually, and we're more resilient to the environmental variance that a bird living outside in the landscape was prone to. And so what we were finding is that when we were using these highline birds, that we had a lot more variation in our egg production. And so we started looking around for a different bird to utilize, and we found a bird that was based on the Australorp, which is an Australian developed bird called, the Australorp stands for Australian Black Orpington. And these birds we have brought into our egg production and have found that they're just so more effective in the system that we're utilizing. And so that's just one real quick example of how moving back towards a more heritage style birds is not only more beneficial to our landscape and their natural instincts. We have lower mortality. They don't start to become aggressive. One thing that's really interesting with those brown birds, the minute they start to get stressed, they turn on each other, and it can be horrendous to see. And one of our flocks, we lost about 10 to 15% of our birds to cannibalism, where they just turned on themselves. And that was all based on poor nutrition when they were being raised, and then the stress of the environmental wind, rain, and things like that. And we never have that with a more heritage style bird. So that was just a bit of an example of some of the things that why we're trying to utilize a different genetic diversity in our farming system. I think the other thing that...
Randall, we might just stop you there.
Yes, sorry.
Yeah, no, really good. Thanks for sharing those examples, and hopefully we can come back around to you, but we might just pop over now to Robin, who will speak to us of the diversity of seeds and what she has to share from the work that she's done.
Well, we moved to this piece of property, which is a coastal property, in 2007, and we were home gardeners. we were able to have quite a diverse home garden, and we were able to feed our family. But what we realized is that we kept producing more and more food. And we really wanted to develop a model for food distribution that localized the food growing and the food consumption. So the CSA model. So we began developing a CSA in 2010, and then ran a CSA until 2020. And so at the height of our CSA, we had a 39-week season. We fed 120 families, a diverse vegetable box with a range from 8 to 17 items. So incredibly diverse to try and keep, we had the same clientele through a season. So we didn't have a buy a box as you needed it sort of system. And really our clientele was localized to about a 30-kilometer radius around the farm. Throughout that process, we were constantly looking for, we are also a biodynamic grower. So we use a biodynamic system to manage our land. And when we first moved here, we established native windrows and did a lot of native planting to diversify not only above the ground, but diversify below the ground, believing that plants that network together have a strong ability for resilience. And throughout our CSA journey, we really, I would say in the beginning, we really struggled to find seed that was resilient in our system. So seed that knew how to mine for minerals, seed that knew how to network, seed that knew how to use light and soil to grow, as opposed to using water soluble fertilizers. And so we also struggled to find diversity in varieties. And because of the CSA really thrived on diversity, we started importing a lot of seed. And probably 5 years into our CSA, I did a tally and realized that we were importing over 70% of our seed, and 95% of that seed was not organic. And that set off alarm bells for me. And so I feel like our journey into seed was more of pennies dropping. Like the more you dig around into your own system and look at what's working, the more you realize that the system that you're trying to work with is actually quite, isn't really supporting the way that you're farming. And I think that the more I realized that, oh, wow, we're really getting attached to these hybrids, which have their place in an agricultural system, except that we couldn't control anything about that hybrid. We were constantly needing to buy more seed, and that seed may or may not be organic. Then realizing that over 50% of the world's seed is owned by 4 major corporations, and it just many different steps led us to realize that we really needed to jump into seed preservation. So our goal with our breeding, so we're farmer breeders, and our goals really are to find varieties that thrive in minimal input systems. So finding varieties that really do know how to mine for their own minerals, that are not reliant on chemicals for pests, disease, growth, finding varieties that have an intrinsic good flavor, and then trying to refine those varieties while maintaining genetic diversity. So what we have found is that the genetic diversity contained in a seed will actually promote that seed through different climate situations. And so if we try and limit that genetic diversity, we may achieve strong agricultural gains, such as yield or uniformity, but they come at a cost. So it's been a journey to try and make these breeding goals that can address not only the genetic diversity inherent in plants and encourage that, but also make seed that is market worthy.
Great, thank you, Robin. That's really interesting, and I hope we can come back to that to discuss a little bit more around the control of seeds, and maybe there are some growers or market gardeners who might have more things to contribute later on too. We'll go over to Nick. Nick, it'd be great to hear from you on where biodiversity is key in your sort of farm management, and from Randall and Robin, we've heard of, I guess the products that we're farming for, but it'd be great to hear the sort of the ecosystem that you manage and how you do it.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. I'm really sort of excited to be part of this conversation, particularly hearing the last two speakers. But look, we manage about 150 acres of Jinnabara country here. It is all in various stages of disrepair and abuse from the last couple of 100 years of colonialism. I guess, what we produce for market is grass-fed beef, pasture-raised pork, and pasture-raised eggs, and the odd market garden crop. And that's sort of what we sell to stop my wife and I starving under capitalism. But the farm produces a great deal more than that. And I was sort of concerned about how I would articulate our commitment to biodiversity and what we do around biodiversity on the farm, because I sort of thought, well, some of our practices are pretty unremarkable. I mean, we've been practicing a holistic plan grazing in a sort of stacked mixed species enterprise like Randall described for probably 6 years now. And when I started those management practices on this farm, one of the first things I really noticed was the farm exploding with life. The first and most striking example for me was when we started planned grazing with the cattle. So moving them through small paddocks with electric fences and then giving areas long rest periods. We had quail breeding on this property probably for the first time in 150 years. It was previously stocked with very short grass and no habitat for those birds. And that was the first time I saw a connection between our management and biodiversity coming onto our farm. We are now at a point where there's well over 100 bird species that we cite regularly on the property, which is just incredible to us, as well as the uncounted mammals and birds and spiders and things like that. But my experience of promoting biodiversity and caring for country growing up on the family farm was about sort of programs like Land for Wildlife, where you commit to fencing off a creek bed or planting a few eucalypts and things like that. And the promotion of biodiversity, in my conception, has always been separate from your farming. So we divide a bit of land to that, and, the animals can go and hang out there while we produce beef on the remainder of the property or whatever. And that is just absolutely not the way it works here. And indeed, what I have really noticed is, particularly when we started leasing some property in the local area, we've leased what used to be a dairy farm until the early 90s, and then was essentially abandoned by humans. It had a little cabin on it that the owner came and drank red wine and smoked joints in once a weekend. And the remaining 80 acres was sort of never touched, other than sort of occasionally sprayed to stop it overtaking the house, I guess. And that farm, with 20 plus years of no human management at all, is the least biodiverse bit of country I have set foot on. It is, in our sort of subtropical, high succession, high rainfall environment, now just a thicket of introduced species. So a thicket of lantana and devil's fig and wild tobacco and things like that. There are the odd deer that runs through it, but there is very little bird life. There are no native mammals in that. They only exist right on the edges of it, right at the fence line, where other more diverse environments are occurring. And then through that thinking and through those observations, I've kind of realised that biodiversity actually can't be promoted through an unmanaged landscape. And we think, as I said, in that Land for Wildlife conception where it's about removing humans from the landscape. The biodiversity that existed in this valley pre-colonisation, sort of 1850-ish, the landscape here had actually been managed by humans for about 45,000 years, probably longer. And the biodiversity that was here at that time required active human participation. So that's where we're at. And I mean, I guess I could bend your ears for hours about our farming practices that promote biodiversity, but I guess that's my real interest in it, that we can grow food, support our family financially, and create a home for thousands of animals, hundreds of thousands of animals, as part of a whole thriving ecosystem, rather as something separate to what we do.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Nick. That was an amazing summary.
Mm-hmm.
And lastly, over to our farmers at Highfield, Louise and David. Feel free to introduce your farm. And I guess the interesting point is that 2/3 of your farm had a conservation covenant on it when you purchased the property. And it'd be interesting to hear how you manage that, whether it is separate or as an integrated whole.
Yeah, that's right. So David here from Highfield Farm and Woodland. Highfield is 830 acres, or about 330 odd hectares. As you said, 2/3, when we purchased it almost 10 years ago, 2/3 of it was already under conservation covenant, protecting predominantly box gum woodland. So a lot of that part of the property is remnant woodland and also regrowth from areas that had been cleared. And then the other third was predominantly grassland, grazing grassland, some of which may have been open grassland for a long time under Wiradjuri management before colonisation, and some of which had obviously subsequently been cleared. So in a way, we actually bought into quite rich biodiversity. And our main interest in the topic is Indigenous biodiversity, I guess, in the Indigenous environment. So when we bought the property, it already had very rich biodiversity. We've recorded 140 different bird species, for example. And Louise is much better on the botany, but it's very diverse and rich botanically as well. The main work in terms of interventions that we've done on the property is actually on the part that's not the conservation area, the other 1/3, which we run Dorper sheep and a few Dexter cattle on. And we've been also attempting to manage in such a way as to re-establish and promote the spreading of Indigenous grasses, kangaroo grass, wallaby grass, and so on, weeping grass. And that's trying to manage the livestock through rotational grazing and so on, dividing what we inherited very large paddocks, 4 very large paddocks, which are now about 15 much smaller paddocks. So trying to manage that way, not use super, obviously, or lime, and thereby trying to encourage the return of native grasses. And then do also some of the more conventional land care type stuff that Nick was sort of mentioning just before, fencing off some vulnerable areas to restrict grazing, do some plantings into some areas. We've been involved in paddocks, in projects to plant paddock trees, so individual trees dotted throughout the cleared paddocks to form sort of stepping stones for birds and other wildlife, gliders and so on, to move through the landscape and to link up with the remnant woodland areas as well.
It's probably worth also saying that we are permitted to graze the land that we have under a conservation covenant, but very sensitively and strategically, mostly to control weeds, because our sheep are very good at doing that, and to also control annual grasses, again, to promote perennial natives. So at the right time of year, we can do that, and handily that often ends up being the the period in autumn when you're least likely to have an amazing amount of feed in this part of the country anyway. And a lot of the fencing off projects that we've done have really been there to re-establish native vegetation. But these aren't fenced off forever either. These are grazed occasionally. Once they've been established, you can't establish a wattle and put livestock in, because livestock, well, at least sheep, will target wattle very quickly and easily and take it out of the system. So you have to wait for it to re-establish. I just thought it might be interesting to share some advice that we've had on biodiversity on our farm. First of all, there was some advice we got from an agronomist. Very, very early in our time here, being total novices, a young agronomist volunteered his services to come and view our farm. He was just starting out on a consulting process, and we thought, hey, he's just starting out, we're just starting out, he's going to give us some free advice. Let's see how it goes. We gave him a briefing about 2/3 conservation, 1/3 farming, box gum, grassy woodland, critically endangered habitat, the incredible bird diversity that we had on our property. And his advice was primarily for us to totally destroy an endangered ecological community called Carrick's sedgelands. And the Carrick's is a sedge that grows in the bottom of the valleys. Some of you, particularly in box gum grassy woodland country, may actually have this in your country. It slows the progress of the water down moving through the valley, and it deflects any erosive potential of rainfall, of heavy rainfall. And where it's been removed from our landscapes further down the valley is metre deep erosion gullies. So even though we were novices, we decided not to take that advice. And the Carrick's has been an incredibly valuable landscape feature to preserve the valley and to stop erosion, and also it's vital habitat for at least 3 birds.
Including the quail.
Including the quail.
That Nick mentioned.
Yeah.
On his property.
Yeah.
And your intuition to protect that against the agronomist's advice, was that because you understood it and you knew it was an Indigenous, native species? Was that your gut instinct?
Well, I did know it's an Indigenous species, but I guess I have some botany and some botany and some ecology background, very limited. But I think by observing a landscape, you can see where certain plants grow and where certain plants don't grow. Mm-hmm. And the Carrick's only grows in the drainage lines. So it's obviously serving a purpose. Mm-hmm. It's serving a purpose to slow the movement of the water through the valley and deflect the erosive power. It was also filtering the water that was going into our dams to make sure, and our dams were beautifully clear because the sediment was being trapped in the Carrick's. Mm-hmm. The other interesting piece of advice we had was actually from a permaculturalist. We had engaged him to give us some advice about a grey water system, and we again gave him the same brief about our conservation area, the 2/3 under a conservation covenant, the critically endangered habitat, the incredible bird diversity we have here with 140 different species. And I'd also pointed out to him when he arrived that the bird diversity was actually particularly near where we were talking and discussing the grey water system, because to use permaculture language, is really it was at the edge of 3 different sort of subhabitats: forest, woodland and grassland. So he called this in, and then he said, okay, so before we talk about the grey water system I'm going to develop for you, I think you should destroy all these trees that are here so you can do your zones properly. And these are the very trees that were the sites of some of the greatest bird diversity on our property. His advice was destroy those trees, do your zones properly. You can rebuild that habitat over there in zone 5 or 6 or whatever it is.
These were predominantly very old, very well established eucalypts, which close to the sort of in the house yard area.
So I guess the summary of that is that you can get some pretty interesting advice, both from a sort of mainstream agronomist point of view and from a permaculturalist point of view, that both are advising the destruction of some pretty extraordinary habitat and bird diversity that we utilize to graze, that we utilize to pasture raise our chickens and our eggs, and that we graze. So
thank you for sharing those examples. I think it's interesting to hear examples to sort of color the discussion we're having. And with that point, both of those ones you mentioned were native, but I guess I'd like to maybe throw back over to the breed and seed farmers to hear from you your vision or your sort of understanding of what it will take or what it will look like to sort of relocalize seeds and breeds that are not native to Australia, but in the future, you know, how can we sort of integrate those breeds so they become part of our ecosystem? So Randall or Robin, whoever would like to answer.
Well, I can go first in relation to livestock. I think it's really interesting to hear the conversation, because I think it's all pointing to a very similar end result, that, you know, if we keep down this industrial path, we're going to end up in a very, very tight little narrow point with very limited diversity. Particularly in relation to seeds and animals that we're trying to work in partnership with our landscape. I find it really interesting when I look at heritage type breeds, how so many of those animals, their names are related directly to place. So it's country that has developed, you know, the people in those locations, like your Wessex saddleback or your English large blacks, or, you know, a Sussex hen, you know. So from these animals have been developed relative to the location and the purpose that they're needed for. And what really excites me, I think it's really important to try to foster and preserve those heritage breeds, but even more so, we need to take those heritage breeds and develop breeds that are relevant to our country right here, right now. So something for me, I look forward to developing a Goombra or a Bundjalung pig or a hen, you know, a pig that is very drought tolerant, you know, is able to graze on open grasslands and those sorts of things. And so with time, we develop a broader, diverse genetic pool, because each area is continuing on with that age-old farmer-led family small-scale farm operation of breeding their own breed specific to their location, and then trading that with the other farmers in other locations as they see the need for genetic diversity from different locations.
So some Australian mongrels is what you're saying, Randall?
Oh yeah, bring on the mongrels. You know, you can't kill a bitzer.
Thank you. And Robin, to hear from you on localizing seed would be wonderful.
Well, I think that the point that Randall makes and that Louise makes, it's the idea, and that Nick made so eloquently, is this idea of where does the farmer fit within the landscape and within agriculture. And I think that farmer-led breeding is just that. It's you as a farmer walking your fields with a knowledge of what you're looking for. You know, what am I looking for? What am I looking for from this breed? What am I looking for from this variety? How will this variety further, you know, prosper here, or will it or won't it? And I think that in our seed work, something that, you know, seeds really slow work, and it's slow work because you plant a whole lot of something and then you have to wait and you have to observe and you have to watch how it adapts to the situation or the condition. And you have to note that, and that situation and condition changes from season to season. But that's why genetic diversity is so important, is because you want to find, you know, a certain strain that inherently can move through and adapt itself, and that becomes food security. And so I think that more and more as farmers, we're being steered away from observation. We're being asked to conform to, you know, yield, or this variety is what the supermarket wants, you know, it has a uniform nature, and we're not given the time or space to observe different varieties and different crops and make these selections that we can then carry through and keep going with. And some of these generations, like we've had, you know, where one of the earliest seeds that we've been saving on the farm is now in generation 5. And what we're seeing out of generation 5, which is 5 seasons of moving something forward, is a plant that resembles the original plant, but it has so many other characteristics. You know, it's able to go through the height of sunlight without bolting, which before that, it would take one high heat or one, you know, incredibly light day, and that crop would just go to seed. And so your harvest window was really small. And we had a crop, you know, in generation 5 that stretched for 17 days. So it took 5 seasons, but we've now stretched one day to 17 of being able to cope with our light and our heat and our drought. And, you know, that's just one variety. So I think that what's kind of difficult though is shooting ahead, like which varieties are worthy of moving forward. And, you know, that is something that I feel like involves more of a seed network. And I'm sure with, you know, livestock, you need your network of, okay, well, we have this variety that maybe has great flavor or a good texture or a great drought resistance. What's its usability? What's its, you know, how many people want to eat that? What season, how does it fit into a seasonal diet? Those sorts of questions involve, you know, a whole network of people all working together. So that's sort of where we're at.
Thanks, Robin. And it's great to see that actually it's not that we're at that stage where we've got a bunch of answers to those questions, but we're in this sort of curiosity stage where, yeah, those questions we have to keep asking ourselves and keep asking each other to gain that knowledge and to accrue that wisdom. Nick has a question. Over to you, Nick.
I think Tammi had her hand up first, mate. I'll give way to the president.
And then I want to throw it out to the participants. I'd love to hear from you guys. So Tam first.
Yeah, no, it's just a question to Robin, because of course we have the Rare Breeds Trust of Australia for livestock breeds. And I'm interested in whether, and I know obviously there's things like diggers or even seeds that are doing some heritage seed, but it's mostly for backyarders. And is there a network for a heritage seed like we have for livestock?
So really we've been sort of like head down, bum up, because seed saving isn't that easy. Like it involves, it's a whole skill, different set of skills. And we have really wanted to jump in and just develop skills. So it's, you know, how to clean the seed, how to harvest, when's the right time to harvest it, how do you dry it, how do you clean it? And, you know, last year we did 90 varieties. This year we've done close to 100 varieties. Each seed is different. Like, and so I think we're starting to get to the point of recognizing that, okay, like we've jumped in, where is there a network? And there's definitely definitely community-based seed saving networks,
Sure.
but what about a network on a I don't know if a larger scale would be there, but a network of farmers, you know, a network of farmers who are preserving seed and passing those along, because our requirements as farmers are really specific. You know, like we do want a lettuce that maybe holds its leaves up a bit higher to make cultivation easier. You know, we are trying to do things that allow us to produce a lot of food with less labor in order to keep the food costs down. And so, you know, we do need a bit of uniformity. There's just different things that we need. I don't necessarily want a tomato that I can put a brick on and it still looks like a tomato, but a tomato that maybe has a little shelf life isn't a bad thing, like,
Yeah.
so that's what I'm trying to find out more about. And I'm really trying to research more farmer-led cooperations. And there's great examples of them overseas. How can we develop that model here? Does it already exist here? I don't know, Tammi. I'm not
That's
sure.
awesome. Thanks, Robin. That's a note for AFSA. So we'll talk again. Thanks, Nick.
Hey, thanks. I thought I'd just disrupt things by throwing a question in straight away. I was so excited listening to what Robin and Randall have just said about like developing breeds that are linked to place and environment and things like that. But what I really notice, even for small scale agroecological ass-kicking farms like all of us, presumably, certainly many people are recognising this room, the pressure is always on us actually not to develop the Goombera chicken, but to get really, really good at providing eggs from the industrial breeds, or indeed in Robin's case, like, get really, really good at producing the tomato you can rest a brick on whilst still building soil and not using chemicals and things like that. And I'm just wondering if anyone's got any comments on like the systems change that we need to facilitate the development of those breeds. It's not an easy question.
Out to our participants, if anyone has anything to contribute.
I think it's kind of like developing the CSA model, Nick. Like in the beginning when we first started our CSA, it was probably 80% trying to explain to people what the whole CSA model was and why it was beneficial, why it was beneficial to have a farmer's needs, a farm's needs, like a land's needs and a community's needs all wrapped together, how that was beneficial, how that benefited them, how that benefited the farmer, how that system, worked for mutual benefit. And I think that that's exactly where we're at, or I feel like that's where we're at with the seed too, is developing conversations, like between breeders, between farmers. So I'm communicating with a lot of breeders. This is what I'm looking for. How can you help me with that? And they're saying, oh, we have this might work for you, and then I'm going to the eaters. I have this. Is it something you're interested in? Because I don't want to waste my time on something that isn't going to be consumed, like I want it to be of interest. So I think that.
Oh, I was just going to say, there's a question here that sort of is asking that what can non-landholders do to advocate or support building these more specific breeds or seeds or, heritage collections of sorts? Is there anything that non-landowners can do? Sort of, I'm assuming that's also eaters.
Randall,
I think one of the obvious
that because you unmuted yourself.
So I was going to say one of the obvious things is they say it in the rare breeds movement, you've got to eat it to save it. And so while I don't think that voting with your dollar is the be all and end all, it is a start, right? Mm-hmm. So eating the heritage breeds and seeds, don't eat the seed, actually eat the plant that grows from it, but yeah. So I think that's one. And honestly, as we find with AFSA, which is a farmer-led, but across the food system sort of alliance, eaters can also help by volunteering and getting involved in the networks that we're talking about. Often eaters have a bit more time than the farmers do to help support the administrative efforts of lobbying for reform, or, turning up on farms like Robin's, even like for volunteer days, if you still take volunteers. I don't know if you do, but yeah, like there are things that you can do without owning land to be really helpful movements.
Yeah, I was going to say this, agree with you, Tammi. And I think yarning is so important. So the conversation around what you're doing. So one of the things we do on our farm is open our farm up, people can come out and see, but having that conversation around when someone says, hey, your pork has these little black marks in the skin when I get my pork chops, what's all that about? And so then you can have that conversation around, well, when animals are outdoors, they grow more hair, and also a coloured pig can be a lot more helpful, like a lot more beneficial. And then all of a sudden that story is being had and taken back into the consumption world, the people that are eating your food, and then you can have those conversations. So I think conversation on all fronts. And so if you're an eater, then I think the key for an eater is to get out there and find the farms that are willing to open their landscape up to you to come and explore and have those conversations around the way that food's produced.
And that's exactly what I was going to say, is make these things conversation pieces. Have a dinner party, talk about this, vegetable that you grew from this seed and why it's so great and how it's performed so well in your home garden, and look how great it tastes. And we can only eat this, 2 months of the year. So that's why we're enjoying it right now. Like, really make these things conversation pieces. And I think that's the best way, because we're busy as farmers. Like, we're really busy. We can't be the ones always directing the conversation. Like, that's what I've realized lately, is that I've really had to focus incredibly on my work. And so I can't be the one who's driving that conversation. I'm really relying on other people to take things I say and to actually really read them, give it attention, read it, and then share it. Like, I need you to do that.
If anyone has any questions that they'd like to jump on and ask, also it'd be good to hear from anyone who would like to contribute what they're doing to promote biodiversity, whether they're sort of backyard farmers or they farm in a larger sense, or they're part of organisations. It'd be good to hear, in what ways they're promoting biodiversity. Could be really small, if there's anyone that would like to contribute. Maybe not. Then questions. I can ask Lisa's question if you'd like. Lisa said, I've worked for organic farmers that seasonally swap commercial seed to seasonally test crops that I know would love to have hardy Australian seeds and crops. But how can we help this in bulk scale for large, medium, commercial, larger than transition farm, for example?
I think that we have been asked for bulk seed, and the hard thing to communicate with people is that, for example, that seed that's in 5th generation, I was able to produce a seed crop from 200 lettuces from 5th generation seed. So it's taken me 5 seed crops to be able to produce a seed crop from the whole planting. So a lot of lettuces. So I did a new lettuce this year. I planted 400 heads. And from those 400 heads, I harvested seed from 40. So I culled out 360 heads and only took the seed from 40. So it's bulk seed packets take years, it's going to take years. So that's what's maybe frustrating to some farmers, and that's what we didn't realize either. We didn't realize that as you really define your breeding goals, you're really reducing the amount of seed that you're actually going to produce, and you still need to make an income. So I think that we just have to keep investing in the whole. For me, it's an organic seed network here in Australia. We just need to keep trying and investing, and it may just be one crop that a farm can bring aboard. But hopefully just by bringing that one crop aboard, it leaves room for us to keep developing more and more.
I've just taken myself off mute. Thanks for answering that question, because I actually do concur with you. Like, what I saw over 5 years with trying to generate extra generations of seeds, and maybe we do have a conversation across all those organic farmers, and perhaps they pick one particular variety or line that they specialize in seed saving, and we end up starting off with a small library that way that we can then share.
it's another aspect of this is how do we get more organic farmers involved in seed production? And if we just take the Organic Seed Alliance, which is based in the United States, you know, they've done surveys every 5 years and surveying farmers. Do you want to be involved in more seed production? And there's a huge amount of farmers that do, but then there's a lot of hurdles they need to cross, and that's what we've been trying to identify ourselves as farmers who jumped into seed production. What are these hurdles, and how can we overcome them in a way that could maybe actually ripple to a community? And I feel like we're very young in establishing all that.
I'd concur.
And
We're
if I
almost
can,
at time, but yeah, Tam, feel free to ask your question.
yeah, no, it's not a question. I was going to add to the response. I was going to support some of what Robin said, and also what everyone's actually said for the last hour, that capitalism isn't going to solve capitalism, and more monocultures of heritage seed is not going to solve capitalism. So I think that the question about how we grow more heritage seed, like at scale, is what Robin said before. We need more farmers, not bigger farms. And we need place-based farms developing the seed and supporting other local farms with that enterprise, not for Robin to produce enough to plant out 1,000 hectares. I think that's like, it's critical to the change that we're aiming for, right? Is to literally, we're trying to crush capitalism here, because it's crushing us and the entire world. So more farmers like Robin who are developing the seeds, more farmers like Randall and Nick who are developing the rare breeds, more farms like Highfield, like Louise and David, who are doing a mixture of protecting sensitive ecosystems while also being actively involved in their management. You know, we need that very place-based and located work, not just somebody who can grow more of the same thing. And in doing that work, we need to do that in solidarity with those who are medium or larger scale, and help them work out transitional ways back to what's going to be better for the entire ecosystem with all of its human and non-human parts. So that's, I think that you already all said that over the last hour. I just thought I'd kind of summarize it in response to that question.
That's a good summary. Thanks, Tam. And it also, yeah, I guess really relates back to that quote that you shared by Tyson Yunkelporter, that idea of the land base is this sort of living knowledge. And yeah, it seems everyone on this call today have some interest or some role that they're playing. And I guess we've also, in the meetings before this conversation, it sort of came up that biodiversity, it's really about a sort of shift in mindset. It's not just about these sort of tools and techniques and sort of management practices that we apply, but and I guess that comes back to why we sort of framed it up like beyond the shelter belt. You know, it's sort of it's got to be that change of mind, and how can we integrate biodiversity in all that we do, and how can we inspire others to sort of pay attention to the birds and pay attention to the seeds, and yeah, move forward in sort of a resilient, cohesive way. We've got one last question. Lynn, please. You might be on mute. Yeah, we can hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Great. Mine's not a question. I just wanted to respond to your question earlier, Amy, about what are some people doing to promote biodiversity. And I'm here because I'm a TAFE teacher in Geelong, and I worked with Tammi many years ago, and I'm particularly interested in what she's doing nowadays. And we run conservation and land management courses to Cert 3, Cert 4 and diploma. And in one of the diploma units that I teach, which is about sustainable land management, we have a big focus on biodiversity, and I really take note of Who spoke first? Just trying to find.
Randall.
Yeah, I take note of what Randall was saying. I believe it was Randall where, you know, there's, you look after this section of your farm and then the rest of your farm is purely farming and that there's no connect. And what I try to do and what we try to do and what the unit is about is we take our students to a variety of farms, including organic, big capitalism, big chemical rich reliance. And we show them the good, the bad and the ugly of farming and the disconnect between, you know, biodiversity and standard agriculture. And so I guess, you know, I'm not out there doing the work of farming or, you know, putting trees in the ground, but we are teaching a whole new generation of how it can be, how land management and agriculture can be, you know, beautifully integrated, and showing the students through working with various farmers the benefits, that it's not just about attracting more birds. There's the benefit of what the birds do for your agricultural, you know, crops and various, you know, issues that come up. So in our own way, you know, we're not treating them as two separate issues. We're showing our students that it goes very much hand in hand, and that it's then down to them to take those messages forward and to try to provide some education and try to get people a bit interested in not seeing, you know, the agricultural enterprise and then the other aspects of your land, the natural resource aspect, as two separate things. Usually the students are pretty horrified at the big chemical rich capitalist big agricultural.
But it's amazing, Lynn, that there's even that diversity in the content, because I'd say not that long ago there was just the one way of farming. You know, the curriculum and the content was very much directed in one way, and you know, if they aren't seeing an option or seeing the alternative, then they just march off the, you know, production line and into those big farms.
Yeah. So. We do see that in. So, you know, I teach purely conservation, and we don't teach agriculture at the Gordon anymore, but there's a couple of big agricultural colleges here in Geelong, and they're still teaching very traditional approaches. But the lovely thing about the region, you know, there's this big regenerative agricultural movement around colac and so on. So hopefully there's a bit more cross or a bit more sharing, or, you know, some of that younger generation of farmers that are still, you know, 100% pure old fashioned ag. Hopefully some of that generation are getting dragged a bit into some of that new information and going, oh, hang on a second, what is this? And I think it'll take a changeover of a lot of their old lecturers and so on to be moving on, and perhaps some new thinking to come on board for some change there.
Lynn, your CMA is trying to drive MO and a few others into the 21st century at the moment through some of the content you're talking about. And I know they have mentioned your program at the CMA in your district, so it is recognised.
Yeah, we've had some really good people working in the conservation land management area for a really long time, and you know, we're student driven and you know, quality education driven, and having students ready for work with a really broad kind of knowledge. So yeah, we are having good success, and we do want to show students the good and the bad and the ugly so that they don't stick too much with the ugly and go for more modern ways of thinking. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. There's lots of support on the chat. People are saying you are doing the work, Lynn.
Yeah.
Nick also threw out a rogue comment about biodiversity credits, and it feels like we could have a whole nother solidarity session on on that topic. I know it's come up a lot of these sort of like offsetting maybe it's something we can discuss at a further date. But that's probably all we have time for. Thanks so much for your participation, for sharing all the work that you're doing, all the farmers we've had on, and thanks for the comments from the attendees. We will have our next solidarity session next month, the month of May. We're planning on doing it on the last Wednesday of the month as per, and it's just before Reconciliation Week. So we're looking to cover the topic around native grains. It sort of coincides with the Grains Conference, which is the Australian New Zealand sort of heritage cereal grains, I guess. So watch this space. We will get ourselves together and share the specific dates, but yeah, it should be the end of May. Is there anything else I haven't forgotten? That seems to be everything. Thanks again, everyone. We'll see you next time.
And thank you, Amy. Thanks everyone for coming.
Yeah,
It's
thanks
been great.
everyone.
So good.
Bye all. Keep up the good work.
Good to see you, Lynn.